Good evening. I'm Greg Champney, and this is the Town of Littleton Finance Committee Fiscal Year 2019 Budget Overview. With me is Bonnie Holston. She's the Director of Budget and Finance, and also with me is Gary Wilson. He's the Vice Chair of the Finance Committee. What we'd like to do tonight is go through several slides, discuss the balanced budget that we plan on presenting at town meeting on Monday, May 7th, and go through these slides and explain exactly what we're going to talk about. With that, I will turn it over to Bonnie, and we can go through these slides, and we'll add comment as we go along.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you. So this is the 2019 budget overview. As Greg mentioned, we are passing a balanced budget for town meeting, or presenting a balanced budget for town meeting. Based on our current revenue estimates, we are projecting a 3.23% increase in available funding for fiscal 2019 over fiscal 2018 levels. It does assume the full use of the 2.5% levy increase allowed under the Mass General Law, and it does adhere with all of our adopted financial policy requirements regarding reserves and debt service reductions, along with capital. So we're pretty pleased that this is imbalanced, again, in adherence with the financial policies. Let me go back. It looked like I skipped one. So based on that, the appropriation summaries look like this for next fiscal year. And we have the 18 to 19 comparisons, and I'll just kind of walk through them pretty briefly. The town operating budgets do increase by about 11%. The reason that increase is a little higher than normal is because we have the full fiscal year impact of some staffing increases that were added mid-year for fiscal 18. Specifically, we had 6 full-time paramedics added at the fire department to bring our service levels up from BLS to ALS, or paramedic level, providing better service. The school appropriation does increase by 4.76%. And again, it adheres with all of their staffing requirements and contractually obligated increases, as well as service levels. The schools also plan on spending just over $1.7 million in reserves. They did plan on spending $2.3 million for this fiscal year, so it is a little bit of a reduction, but again, these are revolving accounts, so they may fluctuate and it may change mid-year. Technical schools, that's the Neshoba Valley Technical School. It does increase by $66,000, but we did have a enrollment increase, so we did plan for that. Other charges, facilities, and infrastructure, this would be like our roadway spending, any other public buildings expenses, does increase by 9.99%, or $283,000. Debt service increases slightly by $102,000, and employee retiree benefits increased by 16%. You will notice a very large increase in our capital and warrant articles. We're planning on spending over $2 million more than we did last year. However, this is because of a significant appropriation into our capital stabilization fund. So it is not actual spending on a particular expenditure, it's putting it into reserves, and we'll go through that in detail in another slide.
And that's following our financial policies and making sure that we're doing the things that we set out years ago when we set these policies forth.
Correct, and planning for the future.
Correct.
So with that, I'll get into the next slide. Staffing increases for fiscal 19. We did do some significant staffing increases for this fiscal year, so we're kind of maintaining for next fiscal year and absorbing the full year impact of that. So for this fiscal year, there's only one new staffing position proposed. It's a full-time facilities director hired as of January 2019, so again, a mid-year hire with a $50,000 salary impact. And again, we're absorbing the full year impact of the mid-year hires this year, specifically $150,000 increases in fire wages and $30,000 for an IT support person hired mid-year. And those were needed adjustments.
Correct. So we're adding these dollars amount in because we did not have the full amount last year. We're recognizing the full amount for this year.
Correct. It was a phased-in approach. It was a phased-in approach. So under general government, which covers general administrative offices like collections, the selectmen, finance, legal, and land use, changes over fiscal 18 levels. We have an additional election this year, so there's a $3,500 increase in that account. the $30,000 that I mentioned earlier for the full year impact of IT support increases. Public buildings is increasing by $74,000. This is the account where the new facilities director would be housed. And there's some additional expenses for maintenance on all facilities. You remember we have the fire station coming online full-time this year. It's a larger facility which may need some more by way of, heating and other issues.
So that 24,000, some of that is specifically earmarked for the fire station, or is it just general that this new facility director could utilize?
It's either. If there are savings that can be recognized in other areas, that money could be spent somewhere else. But we do know that it's a larger facility. We may need, additional cleaning services just for the square footage. So it's a prudent place to put some additional dollars in case it's needed. It's our hope, though, that bringing on a facilities director, we'll be able to get some economies and savings across different buildings that might be managed differently. So hopefully that will be a better way of managing this account. We've also got a general insurance increase of $25,000, so it's going from $375,000 to $400,000. We've had some claims experience increases this year. We've had some additional liabilities that we need to adjust for. And within this account, all of the steps and 2% COLA increases are programmed.
Excellent.
So then we go on to public safety, which would include police, fire, EMS, and inspectional services. The building department, there is a wage increase that appears in the budget. However, it's not a full-time equivalent increase. It's monies that are paid for these same employees out of revolving accounts. We're just putting it into the general fund and showing the revolving account offset for better transparency to show what the department expenditures actually are. So again, it's offset by a transfer from the revolving account, so it's neutral in the budget.
Revenue neutral.
Yes, it's neutral in the budget. This is where that $150,000 increase is housed for the fire department budget, and again, it's the full year impact. We put $150 increase in last year and another $150 this year, so to phase it in. In this area, all the step increases are programmed, and a 2% COLA is programmed for all non-union employees. The collective bargaining agreements, if we reach agreement, will be settled in another article. Education. We have two areas in education where they are funded in the operating budget, the Littleton School Department appropriation and the Neshoba Tech appropriation. So the school department appropriation is increasing by $898,300. This is combined with $1.7 million use in revolving funds that they use towards their total operating budget. And also included within the school department appropriations is a $100,000 article to be used for resource materials in the capital plan. That was previously in their operating budget. This is the third year that we've done this, so it provides a little bit more relief in their operating budget to use for other areas. This meets with the school department approval. It funds all of their contractually obligated salary increases and their staffing levels as they need them. And in the Neshoba Tech, the appropriation did increase by $66,000. Our enrollment increase went from 30 to 34 students. So as the enrollment changes, so does our appropriation. If the enrollment goes down, then our appropriation technically could go down, depending on.
So that $66,000 number here, is that tied directly to those 4 students, or is that an addition with the 30 students that are already there, meaning there's a little bit of a lift on the 30 students plus
Correct.
there's some lift on the 4 new students?
There's always a minimum spending requirement from the town, which is decided at the state level, and then it's divided by enrollment. So
are these numbers up or down, just out of curiosity? Are we seeing an increase in this, or is it pretty stable?
The previous year, it's funny, it went from 34 to 30 students, so it was a decrease last year, and now we're back up to the same 34 students. So then we go to Public Works. In the Public Works area, we have a small increase in the roadway appropriation. In our financial policies, we do decide that roadway expenses must be increased at least by 1% annually. So this is kind of the minimum amount that it needs to increase by. Our field maintenance budget, based on the feedback that we got from town meeting 2 years ago, we've been working at culling this budget out separately so that individuals can see what we actually spend on field maintenance. We're not quite there yet, but this is a major shift towards it. So what we've done is culled out $185,000 in clearly identified expenses that were previously budgeted within the highway department budget. So this isn't a new expense, it's just something that we've shifted out of highway into this new field maintenance budget, just to show town meeting what's actually being spent. And while this does include all of the town funding that we've been able to identify, it does not include school expenses because that's under their own budget. So we're making progress. We're hoping that we can make some more in the coming years, but we're pleased that, at least this can be shown.
So this increase in roadway appropriation of $9,000 for, is that just for general repairs?
That's for everything. So it's general repairs. It includes any repaving. It includes major projects that might be undertaken, like Taylor Street, I think was one of them, or Foster Street. We did New Estate Road and Nagog Road in the past out of these appropriations. So it's everything.
It's a small amount there that we're
Correct. Correct. And just by giving you a dollar figure on that, that brings this budget from $711,000 to $720,000 for this year. So, Health and Human Services, that would include Board of Health, Veterans Agent, Elder and Human Services departments. There's a $4,000 decrease in the Board of Health wages. It's just because of a reclassification of the position there. We had a change in staffing, so we took advantage of the fact that we needed to look at the positions and see where they were graded. It's a small change. The departments, there's no staffing changes in any of these areas, and it does include all step increases and any COLAs that might be due, a 2% COLA for non-union employees. And culture and recreation. So this would include parks, recreation, and the library departments. We do have a general fund subsidy to the Park and Recreation Enterprise Fund. It's $211,000 this year, and it's set to cover the salary and benefits of the director and the assistant director. We also provide a $50,000 appropriation for facility and infrastructure maintenance. And as well, there'll be a $400,000 project from CPC funds for the Long Lake Bathhouse facility rebuild. This has been something that's been talked about, I think, the last 2 years, so this is looking for the funding to actually start the project. Again, within these departments, all step increases are programmed and a 2% COLA for non-union employees.
I'd like to talk about this for just a minute. So the salary and benefits that are covered in this budget is strictly for the top level?
The director.
Management, the director level?
And assistant.
So anyone else that's being paid through revolving funds?
They're paid from revolving funds, the enterprise fund.
Yeah. So are they subject to these 2% COLA increases as well?
Yes, they are.
Okay, so they basically would increase the fund or the cost of the programs to offset the salaries?
Yes. What we did do is hold the enterprise fund harmless for changes in minimum wage, which is incorporated in that $211,000 appropriation. So there was an increase last year to the minimum wage to the $11 figure that we're using today. We wanted to hold them harmless because I think they were at a $9 rate at that point for a lot of their employees. So we did incorporate that, but other than that, everything else is paid for by the fees that they generate.
Okay, excellent.
Fringe. So this would be fringe, retiree expenses, health insurance, OPEB, which is other post-employment benefit funding, or primarily retiree health insurance, and our retirement assessment. This is where, there's always, it seems to be a large change, a large increase the last few years. Employee and retiree benefits are increasing by about 16%, or $1,361,000 this year. Medical premiums, surprisingly and happily, came in at an increase of 0%, which was great, but we do need to adjust for the full year impact of the fiscal 2018 mid-year hires, which added about $175,000 to that cost. OPEB funding. So what we do is we are trying to pay towards our unfunded obligation for retiree health insurance benefits. And we've been doing tremendous work on funding this in the last few years. So our financial policies say that we need to increase our OPEB funding each year by 10%. That is just right off the bat. Our financial policies also state that for all the new hires or the change in hiring that we add mid-year or during the previous fiscal year, we need to add that funding in there too. And we have an actuarial table that tells us how much it is per employee. So we've included that. Additionally, where we're going to draw down our free cash, and we'll talk about that in a few slides, if we're going to draw down free cash more than we do for just capital, we need to augment our OPEB funding even more. So this year it includes an additional one-time appropriation of $696,000. So that's what's really driving that fringe increase to that 16%. But it's a good thing. I mean, we're working on meeting that obligation, so it's not anything really to worry about at this point.
Have you looked at any projections with regards to this fringe number for the increase of 1.3 million and where you think it may be in the next 4 or 5 years?
We're projecting pretty much a 12% increase year over year. This year, if we did not do this additional $696,000, we would have wound up about 10%, just under 10%, which would have been wonderful, considering all of the new hires that we did this year. But we estimate at 12% because that is really a prudent number to use for health insurance increases.
I think we've been aggressive with this more than most communities. I've done a little research, and I think this is as healthy as we can be.
It is.
With OPEB. So.
It is. It's great. So again, that's kind of the major driver over the increase. We do have a retirement assessment increase of $142,000. That goes to Middlesex retirement, and we also have our Medicare funding at 1.45% of salaries. So with any salary increases, Medicare goes up. We need to fund that. Debt. So we do have a small increase in debt service of $93,000. It's primarily for the placement of long-term debt for Alumni Field and the fire station, and we have a small obligation still outstanding for our roadway plan. And again, per our financial policies, any debt service that gets paid down, we don't let those dollars go back into the operating budget. We keep them to use for other capital or other debt. So it's kind of isolated that way. So in our capital plan, we are spending in capital spending this year just over $2 million, which is consistent with previous years. We try and shoot for that target somewhere between $2 and $2.5 million every year. The highlights of that are listed here. We have $250,000 for a 6-wheel dump truck replacement, which is one of our larger pieces of equipment, and a very busy piece of, yes.
A very old piece.
Very old piece. They do a great job maintaining their equipment, but it's time. We also have $431,000, almost $432,000 in facility assessment recommendations that'll be managed through PMBC, which include improvements at the highway roof, highway building roof, and other facilities across town. We've been trying to address this more proactively in the last few years rather than being reactive. We're working towards that. I think we're making some progress, but there's always a need for facility improvements. We have $200,000 for a ladder truck. Now, a ladder truck doesn't cost $200,000, but this is for a matching grant. The ladder truck is estimated at about $1.2 million, but there is a grant available that we have applied for. We're hopeful that we will obtain it. So we need to earmark $200,000 as our match towards this grant. We will know probably in August whether or not we qualify or have received it, and if not, then we'll need to come back for $1 million in additional appropriations at some point.
So, go ahead.
So I believe that if this grant doesn't come through this year, we're keeping the $200,000 earmarked for that purchase of that,
yes.
Regardless, correct?
Yes, it would be used towards that,
okay.
Regardless. We have $200,000 earmarked to address town facility space needs. It's my understanding that there'll be a committee formed to best look at this and decide what direction the town needs to go towards in the future. We've kind of outgrown our space here. There's not enough meeting areas, and we need to do something. Yes, we need to do something. There are $127,000 in our usual patrol vehicle replacements. This includes marked and unmarked vehicles. $135,000 for school Chromebooks and technology, $100,000 for school resource materials that I mentioned previous that used to be in the operating budget, and $100,000 to fund technical services need to meet the new MS4 permit, stormwater permit. This is actually funded from Clean Lakes, so there's no impact to the general fund. So this is a great thing for that. But we are required to meet the stormwater permit requirements, so it's not really anything we can avoid.
All right.
Oops, let me go back. I think I skipped one. Here we go. We do have a special town meeting before which will
always?
start kind of half an hour into the annual town meeting. So we have a couple of highlighted areas in the special town meeting. The first is under Article 4. We're going to be transferring some funding from free cash into our stabilization fund, a total of $647,755. We're going to use this money in the following two articles, Articles 5 and 6. So it seems a little bit like, why are we doing it this way? But our financial policies say that if we're going to use money out of free cash, we need to first put it into stabilization. Part of that reason is to get it into stabilization is a majority vote. To get it out of stabilization is a 2/3 vote. So it just puts it back that the town really needs to support the use of these funds for whatever purposes that are defined. So we're going to put this money in Article 4. We're going to take out part of it in Article 5 and the other part in Article 6. Article 5 is going to be adding money into our CPC funds, which is the Community Preservation Act funds. We have a 1% surcharge on the levy right now. We can go up to 3%, but rather than charge that to the residents, we can appropriate money into that if we have other funds available, and we do. We'd like to use some of the free cash in order to meet the full 3% allowed match. Why would we do that? Part of it is because the state gives us a better state matching fund piece. So if we can get to the full 3%, we get the highest and best match from the state.
What is the match rate this year?
I
Or
think
what
it
the-
was 19% this year, which was lower than previous years, but it's better than anything I can get on the market. So
Sure.
if I can get 19%.
And we've consistently been at 3% with this, right?
Yeah, the last 3 years. This will be the third year. So again, these monies go into the CPC funds and then they get appropriated out of them by town meeting vote again. So there is, some protection in putting them in and where they will get spent. The other thing that we're going to do is put $350,000 into Article 6 to establish a special indemnity fund for police and fire personnel. And what this does is allow us to really put a reserve in place in case we have some type of catastrophic event. For police or fire personnel, we can pay medical bills that might be beyond what we have in our normal operating budget. So you're not constantly over budgeting for the worst case scenario. You can put this aside. It sits in the account, and you can add to it in years that you might need to, but you don't necessarily have to add to it every year. So it's another good reserve. That's how I would look at this account. And this is something new that was just created in 2016 for towns to take advantage of. So we would like to do that.
Is that this is our first year doing this?
Yes, we have to, this article will establish the fund and then fund it. And we might come back, every year to fund it or only every few years, depending on how it gets used.
And we can choose how much money we choose to put in.
Correct.
I mean, so we're starting it with a pretty good amount.
Right.
But we could reduce that or increase it depending on
Correct.
our financial situation.
Right. And I think it might be the goal of the financial subcommittee group to look at this and see if there's a threshold that we should just keep it funded at.
Makes sense.
So in Article 5, Community Preservation Act funds. So this is where we're going to take that $297,000 that I referenced from free cash, along with other funds that are listed here, to meet the full $549,000 maximum appropriation that we can make. So again, this will get us to the full state match, the best and full state match that we can get. Last year, I think it was $180,000 that we got from the state. So, it's worth doing this if the town has the funding available. This year we have some funds remaining from a few developments and host community agreements. Newtown Hill cell tower funds, totaling almost 53,000, along with the other host community agreements that we have for developments, will get us where we need to be.
That's great.
Capital stabilization. So we are making a large appropriation into capital stabilization this year, basically because we have the reserves to do so. We've let our free cash build up the last few years, and again, following our fiscal policies. It's good to, appropriate this into stabilization once it builds up to a comfortable level, because again, it's a 2/3 majority to get this money out of stabilization. So it's a good, secure place to keep the funding until the town's ready to spend it. The other thing is, if we leave it in free cash, once we get past July 1st, it needs to be recertified. So if the town were in a situation that they wanted to spend funding in the fall and free cash were not certified, they couldn't do it. Putting it in stabilization allows them to. So capital stabilization was established in fiscal 14. This is going to add $2.6 million into it for 18. We need to put at least 1% of our capital spending, which would be just over $20,000, so we're well over that. We have plenty of potential uses coming up. I mentioned the ladder truck, dependent on the grant. We know that there's been discussions about athletic field needs, the library, roads, land acquisitions, or any other facility needs. So just keeping it here will help better plan for these types of projects. And again, as I mentioned, funding coming out requires a 2/3 vote at any town meeting.
Excellent.
This is also something that we've been, I think, very prudent in utilizing, our debt exclusion stabilization fund. We created this in 2017, and I'm really pleased with the way that this has been working. But we appropriated $532,000 to start this, and what we did is planned on, in fiscal 17, reducing our excluded debt level down to the 2021 level. So instead of paying the debt service that was required raising the debt service required at the 2017 level, we lowered it by several $100,000 because we put money in this account. So it sounds like it's a complicated, concept to get, but basically we saved 17 cents on the single tax rate in that fiscal year, or about $68 on the average home value. So we took that further in fiscal 18 and appropriated another $256,000 to bring the excluded debt level down another few years to the 2024 level. That saved 19 cents on the tax rate, or $72 on average. So for fiscal 19, we're going to put an additional amount of money in there, another $242,000, to bring the excluded debt level down another year to the 2025 level. That's probably going to be in the $75 savings range. We won't know that until I actually set the tax rate in October, November. But this is a great thing. In the first year, I think our excluded debt level was $1.8 million, and we brought it down to $1.5 million. So that's money that we did not have to raise on the taxpayers' backs.
Like that.
So I'm really proud of this. I have to say that the Division of Local Services actually called and asked about this and wanted to know how this was working and how we were planning for this. So it's almost a unique thing for Littleton in that we're doing this, and the town should be proud of it. It's working really well.
I think anytime you save the taxpayers' money, it's a good thing.
Yep, and the boards, the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen have been very positive about this and making sure that we keep looking at this every budget cycle.
Yeah.
I'm quick. I am very happy to say that we just went through our bond rating review in the last month, and we've been able to retain our AAA bond rating. So this saves us millions of dollars over 20, 30-year terms in interest rates. The key criteria, I can't say this enough, that they look at is what are our financial policies, and then they test them. Are we following them? Do we put our reserves, do we fund our reserves? Do we fund OPEB? All of the things that we've been talking about. They look at our debt exclusion stabilization fund and our debt management. So they've been extremely, positive in looking at our rating going forward. I can't say enough how the interworkings between the boards, the Finance Committee, the Board of Selectmen, the School Committee, how this has helped us in the long term. So again, we just need to make sure that we review these policies every year and that we actually follow them. So
Yeah, it's great. I mean, how many years now have we been at a AAA bond rating?
since 2014.
It's been a while.
Yep.
Yeah, that's
Yep.
great. It's great news.
Yep. Looking forward, so there's always, things on the horizon that we're watching out for. Particularly, we need to look at our increase in new growth revenue and the changes in the demographics of our new growth revenue. Valuations of commercial and industrial sites. So we had several years ago a lot of vacancies in our commercial and industrial sites, and commercial vacancies equal, low values. So those types of things, even if it's a large building, if it's vacant, it's not valued at a same level as a occupied property.
Plus, you're not able to tax the personal property inside of the
Right.
building.
There may
too.
be no personal property.
It's zero. Right. And we went through that with the old Very Fine building for a long
Correct.
time.
Correct. So along with that, we need to look at the impact to schools because we've had a lot of residential class housing come on to the market. Those may impact the enrollment demographics. We've had a demand for additional public safety services. The ALS, ramp up for the last year is a perfect example. We were running at the basic life support level, and we went to paramedic ALS level this year, so because there's been a demand. We added staffing for elder and human services because of needs. We've had a lot of demand for those services with the aging population. And recreational services are always considered a priority for Littleton, with the recreational facilities that we've got. And we are always monitoring changes in OPEB funding requirements. We,
Our friend OPEB.
yes, we get those tables updated as often as we need to make sure that we're actually funding it at the level that we need to. So this is a slide that shows the impact of new growth, as we talked about new growth just in the previous slide. If you look at fiscal 2018, which is the year that we're in now, we had $1.2 million in new growth, which is a tremendous number. We've had a lot of changes in buildings, and both commercial and residential. So you can see that the commercial, residential, and personal property changes. So we had, just in residential, the valuation increase by $33.5 million. That's a lot of houses coming online. So that equated to $608,000 in a dollar increase for new growth. And then you can see the commercial and personal property was very similar if you add the two together. It's just almost the same. So it's about 50-50.
About half.
So that's a pretty good, mix. Ideally, we would love to have the commercial and personal property increase at a rate higher than the residential because Littleton has a split tax rate. So we shift some of our value off of the residential class onto the commercial and personal property class. The current shift of that is 137%. So we can't go past 150% shift. So we're pretty close to that 150. So we want to be careful. If we go past 150, whatever the increase is in new growth is borne entirely by the residential class. So having a good, base that includes commercial and personal property as well as residential is critical. And I point that out because in the next few years, we don't see as much commercial and personal property growth as the residential class, based on what's in the pipeline. For fiscal 18 and in 17, we had the Point come online. We also had Potpourri come online down at Distribution Drive. We've had some good commercial and personal property growth. We don't have much in the pipeline right now. So for the next few years, you can see that both the dollar estimates on growth and the valuation estimates decrease. These can change and will change. I mean, that's the only thing I can probably promise is that they will change. But it highlights the importance of getting more commercial and personal property valuation.
Yeah, I think my concern here, in dealing a little bit in the retail sector, is commercial growth tends to take a little bit longer through the permitting process. The development takes longer to build versus residential. So residential could actually change faster, and we could see a higher increase in residential growth beyond what's projected for the next few fiscal years. Whereas commercial, it may be a little bit more of a steady state and take a little bit longer to kind of build it up. Is that fair to say with your experience?
Absolutely.
Yeah, looking at this, I'm not going to call it a disturbing trend, but I do think that it's something that we need to be aware of. Looking out 2 or 3 years, we've done a really good job at marketing Littleton as a residential community. I think it speaks for itself. But we need to do a better job marketing the commercial side and what we can do. And I think there's some things in the pipeline to address that a little bit. Obviously, the sewer and things like that hopefully will draw. We're trying to draw in that commercial base that in the end, really takes the pressure off the residential growth, and we can stabilize a little bit. So
Keeps the taxes in check for the residents. Commercial growth and personal property growth should be seen as a positive for the residents, whereas residential growth, depending on how much school is impacted, whether it's brick and mortar or students, needs to be a concern as we go forward. But you're right, Bonnie. I mean, these numbers, they are what they are, and they're probably subject to a little bit of change based on the permits that come in and what type of operations are coming into Littleton or businesses, and hopefully we see more of it.
Right. Just so one last thing on this. I think when we look at, there's a lot of big plans. A few slides ago, we were talking about, a library potentially, a senior center either expanding or moving, town offices needing more space. When you compare that to a trend that we're seeing here, we really want to focus on developing that commercial growth because it's going to fall onto the residents. And I think it's very important that the community recognizes that. So
That's a good point.
and I think we've had that conversation before as a board. So
Yeah, and I should point out that the new growth impact is significant to the town's revenue stream. The 2.5% levy increase is about $800,000. So in fiscal 18, you can see we had $1.2 million in new growth. That was more than the levy increase. So it's a very important driver in funding our services, and we do want to make sure that when those things shake out, that where we have the shift to the commercial and personal property, it doesn't slide back to the residential parcels again.
That's a key point here. This slide shows that it is new growth. We have a lot of existing business and residential tax base that's there. This is strictly new growth.
Correct.
That we're looking at and projecting. So, okay.
Great.
Any other thoughts, comments?
no, look forward to town meeting.
Yeah, well, thank you, folks. Appreciate your time tonight watching us, and we look forward to seeing you on May 7th at the middle school. I throw a blank on that. At the middle school for town meeting, and hopefully show up and vote for our articles. Thanks for your time.